Grace and peace be to you from God our Father and Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. And greetings from Trinity Lutheran Church in Pekin, Illinois, and all the saints there. We are so glad to be here. Thank you for bringing myself, my wife Lauren, and our new son Elias down to be with you for this homecoming celebration. Our text for meditation this morning is from the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And especially to meditate on that first verse. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. My prayer for you this morning is that you would hear those words, those familiar words again and again, and that you would hear them as an encouragement and an invitation to deepen trust to your Lord and God, our good shepherd. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. King David was a shepherd, and obviously by his title, a king as well. And King David wrote these beautiful words from Psalm 23. And at first glance, you might think that words like these were easy for a man like David to write. Of course, King David was not in want. He didn't lack for anything. He was the king, after all. He had a kingdom, he had servants, he had wealth and possessions, he had plenty of food, maybe as much food as we'll have just right after this service. David had no lack. But if you've studied your Sunday school lessons and read the scriptures, you know that David's life wasn't always so easy. David knew what it was like to be in want. In fact, David seems to pray and confess the psalm at a time when his life is surrounded by darkness. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Shadow hung over King David's life. And maybe he's referring here to the shadow of King Saul. King Saul, if you know the story, was jealous of David. He was jealous of God's favor with David. He was jealous with David's popularity with the people of Israel. He was jealous that David won so many victories. So maybe it's Saul's shadow that hangs over David, because Saul saw David as a threat. David loved Saul, but Saul wanted to get rid of David. And so he pursued him and tried to kill him. And so we find David out in the wilderness, hiding, trying to escape Saul's wrath. And in the wilderness, David faced want. David faced need. How would King David survive from day to day? How would he endure constantly being hunted and hiding from King Saul? Maybe you can imagine the kind of stress that might put someone under, or depression or anxiety, definitely fear. But the scriptures tell us that David was a man after God's own heart. That David sought the Lord in his trouble, that he prayed and that he confessed and that he sang, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And David based these words, this prayer, on what God had said and what God had done for his people in the past. David knew that his ancestors also had been in want. They had wandered, but they had wandered for 40 long years in the wilderness. The Lord had freed them from slavery in Egypt, and during that time in the wilderness, God had protected them. He had guided them to the promised land. He had fed them on the way with manna from heaven and water from a rock. Another psalm says that God led out his people like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. And another psalm picks up on this language too. It says, "Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock. You who are enthroned upon the cherubim, shine forth." And God, the shepherd and king of Israel, did shine forth. His face shone upon Israel in the wilderness, and his face shone upon David as he faced want and need. God led him, provided for him, and protected him. Did you know that these aren't just a bunch of old Bible stories or Sunday school stories? These stories are for us. Because the shadow of sin and the brokenness of this world, the shadow of death, hangs over our lives as well. And I know hangs over many of your lives and over this congregation. And yet, just as he did for David, God shines forth for you. These words are for you. God is your shepherd. God provides for you and protects you in this wilderness, in this life. When you experience worry or doubt about God's care, anxiety over challenges and troubles in life, inadequacy or uncertainty about your day-to-day needs, remember what God has done for his people in the past. Remember that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, you who lead Joseph like a flock. Maybe that's another story that King David had in mind when he wrote this song. The story of Joseph from the book of Genesis. Another shepherd boy. You know that story, don't you? Joseph was the favored son. His father had made him this beautiful coat, and Joseph's brothers hated him for that, didn't they? They were jealous of him. In fact, they hated him so much that they wanted to kill him, but instead of doing that, they just sold him into slavery. Right? That's not so bad. Joseph's own brothers turned on him. And if you remember the story of David, his life wasn't too different. You might remember that King Saul is actually David's father-in-law. Talk about bad in-law relationships, right? I'm glad mine aren't that bad. But maybe even worse for David was his son Absalom. His son Absalom, later in life, turned against David and tried to take the kingdom from him. He turned people against him. He ran David out of his kingdom, and so David found himself again in want, wandering through the dark valleys, king away from his kingdom, hiding from his own son, rejected and lonely. And yet again, God tended to David in his rejection and in his loneliness. He heard David's prayer just as he heard Joseph's prayer long before, as Joseph was taken away into slavery and separated from his family and his home. God was with both of them. He cared for both of them. And God does the same for you and for me. In your feelings of rejection and loneliness, God doesn't abandon you. He has promised to be with you throughout your life. He is your shepherd. And remember especially your good shepherd who came down from heaven to be with us in our loneliness and under the shadow of death, who came to be God with us in the flesh, Jesus Christ. He is with you now. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I'm glad you have children here. That's great. That phrase, though, for a child, I shall not want, could be kind of confusing, couldn't it? The English sounds kind of weird, kind of old-fashioned. What does want mean anyway? Well, we know that it means that I don't lack anything. I don't want for anything. I have what I need. But imagine for a moment a child hearing those words for the first time. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Want is like what I want, right? Like what I desire. Like I want cookies, or I want candy, or I want this pastor from another town to sit down so we can go out and eat food already. Come on. But the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. I shall not want the shepherd. I shall not want the Lord for my shepherd. Why wouldn't I want the Lord as my shepherd who cares for me and provides for me and protects me? I want to feel safe with the shepherd. Without him, apart from him, separate from him, I'm in big trouble. Of course I want the shepherd. Now we know that's not what it means. That sounds kind of funny. Maybe how a child would think of it. But sometimes that's where we find ourselves. Not wanting the shepherd. There are times in our lives when we don't want God as our shepherd. God nourishes us, He provides for us, He protects us, He defends us, He gives us everything that we need and more, way more than we even need. He gives us our very lives. And He makes this beautiful promise throughout life to be your shepherd, to guide you and lead you. And yet, when one bad thing happens in our lives, a bad day, or a little inconvenience, some kind of difficulty or stress, a sickness, or a death in our family, can't it be so easy to forget about the shepherd? It's like all of those abundant blessings, that abundant provision and protection that He provides for us is out the window. And we might even grumble against God or grumble about to someone else how much we don't have, how much we lack, how much we want, instead of calling upon Him in our trouble. At another time during his life, King David found himself in a different situation. Not with these words on his mouth. David was the king. He had no lack. He had everything he needed, more than he needed. God had saved him from Saul, had given him a whole kingdom. And yet David, the man who at one time confessed these beautiful words, now didn't think that he had enough. David wanted more. He grew unsatisfied and unhappy with the blessings that God had already given him. And in 2 Samuel chapter 11, David sees what he wants. A woman, Bathsheba, up on a rooftop bathing herself. In that moment, David doesn't want to depend on the Lord. David wants to be his own Lord and his own shepherd. And so in this elaborate scheme with a cover-up involving adultery, lies, murder, and just about every other commandment broken, David takes what he wants. He takes Bathsheba and actually kills her husband. Now maybe you can say that you haven't done something quite like that. But remember the words from the hymn that we just sang a moment ago. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. We sang those words, and in singing those words, we confessed those words about ourselves. And God's own word from Isaiah chapter 53 confirms them when it says that all we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned aside everyone to his own way. Because we often want more than what our shepherd has given, don't we? We so easily become unsatisfied with the lives that God has given us, wishing that things were easier, wishing that we had more control, wishing that things had turned out differently. So sometimes we turn to our own ways, and we go away from our Lord and away from his ways. And yet, even in our wandering, even when we don't want the shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Years after David, centuries, not 2,000 years, but centuries after David, God sent a different kind of king. A shepherd after God's own heart. God sent Jesus. And like David, Jesus knew what it was like to be in want. Jesus can sympathize with all of your weaknesses. Jesus went hungry in the wilderness. He faced the same temptations that David faced, that all of us faced without sin. His own people rejected him. His family called him crazy. His followers betrayed him. His friends abandoned him. And yet in all of this, Jesus remained a man and a shepherd after his Father's own heart. He likely knew and likely prayed these same words, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Jesus entrusted his life to his Father. He entrusted his life to the shepherd to keep him safe. And Jesus prayed not only for himself, but he prayed for you too. Because Jesus wasn't any old king. Jesus was and Jesus is the Good Shepherd. Jesus is the Lord in human flesh. And Jesus' heart is so in tune with his Father's love for you that he came down to shepherd wayward sheep like you and like me, we who often turn aside away from him and wander into trouble. Just as the hymn says, Jesus came and Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God. He, to rescue me from danger, interposed his precious blood. He laid down his life for the sheep, for you, for me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Our shepherd provides and protects all the blessings that he gives us in this life. But even more than that, our shepherd has poured forth his entire life, his own blood for you and for me. And today, this same shepherd, he has called you. This shepherd constantly is feeding you, and he is gathering you together around him. And as we listen and as we receive from him, we know that he is also leading us home, leading us back to God, home to a new world with him where we shall have no lack or no want, back to a new heavens and a new earth, a new creation. And as he's leading us on the way, even though we walk through this valley of the shadow of death, we will fear no evil. Because the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Friends at Redeemer, called and gathered together by our Good Shepherd, Jesus Christ, we truly have no lack. Forgiveness of all of our sins, eternal life and salvation, and every spiritual blessing. Thanks be to God. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want.